in the world of true crime, like just suddenly. You've got John Ramsey speaking at CrimeCon. You've got the 15-year anniversary of the Madeleine McCann case and everything around that, which is what we're going to be talking about. You've got Vicky White. There've just been news about that the vehicle has been identified as a Ford Edge bronze, and that they were apparently in a relationship. There's the Johnny Depp case. There's the Morphew case that not clear what is even happening there. Are the police actually looking for something? I don't know, just sort of suddenly feels like so much is happening, right, at the same time. In terms of I see Stephanie's here. I actually wanted to do a interview with Stephanie about CrimeCon, but she said she was exhausted to do it yesterday. Since I didn't hear back from her, I thought she was still exhausted, so I'm not sure if that is the case, but otherwise we'll do that maybe on Thursday, so let us know about that. Bria asks, did you see John Ramsey? I think I know what the answer is to that. Stephanie says, I spent all day organizing my notes. Oh, so that was part of what you needed to do. Real Batman is here, Margaret Zabinski, Kitty Whitty, Glovana, J.N. Baptista, hi there, Buffy Laney. So at the moment, 30 of you have voted. Does Bruckner have an alibi? Yes and no is sort of neck and neck. And then Irrelevant has got the most votes at 42%. We'll see how that changes through the course of this analysis. Now, I just want to repeat what I wrote earlier in chat, that this isn't, the purpose of this analysis isn't to evaluate the case against the McCanns, it's to evaluate the case against Bruckner, the case for and against Bruckner, right? So mods, please pay attention to that. I don't really want to see too much finger pointing or whatever, other than where we talk about the case in terms of Bruckner. And I must say, I was under the impression that, what's his name? Williams Thomas, Mark Williams Thomas. I thought his documentary was airing today on Channel 5. Now I see it's airing on the 9th, I think. So I'm not sure if that's something I misunderstood or whether there's been a sort of last minute change there. Cross 420, hi from France, good to see you. Kimberly Moore, another member, good to see you. Debbie McClellan, hi guys, didn't know about this live. So what we're going to be talking about in this live is essentially the recent information, some might say revelations, and whether you think they are relevant or not, it's nevertheless quite interesting because it takes us back to the day that all of this happened. And again, whether you think Bruckner is relevant or not, it also takes you back into the crime fabric. It takes you back to Praia da Luz. It takes you back to the exact location of the cell phone towers. And it just kind of, even if it's not necessarily relevant, it's taking you back into the case. And I do think it's important that we do that on the 15-year anniversary of this little girl's disappearance. I was responding to a comment someone left where he was just saying how often the word sleep is used in the various books by both Kate McCann and John Ramsey. He wrote Death of Innocence. Kate McCann wrote a book on Madeleine, and just how often the word sleep comes up. And what is quite interesting is both Madeleine McCann and John Benet were described by their parents. In other words, their last moments were described as they were kind of exhausted. They couldn't stay awake, right? That they, went to bed and they were just absolutely tired. And you can kind of like imagine from their A, that they fell asleep, and B, that they must have been taken from their beds because they were so tired, right? and only for it to emerge later. So if you paid attention to this case, if you investigated it, if you followed the breadcrumbs, well, then you found that it didn't really seem to be the case in either of these stories. So in Madeleine McCann's case, she even had a sleep card where she would be rewarded for staying in bed with stars. And there's actually a photo of that. I actually got that on Crime Rocket too. I wonder if I can put a link to that for you guys. Not sure if I can get it quickly. Oh, here it is. Stars for staying in her own bed. And I don't think you would otherwise have a scorecard like that or a report card like that if you were staying in bed, you wouldn't come up with something like that, right? Let's just see, does that link work? Not sure if so you can see there. So obviously that was because Madeleine wasn't a very good sleeper, and Kate McCann does sort of acknowledge that in her book that there was a period where Madeleine didn't sleep very well. And I have spoken quite a lot about sleeping arrangements as that being really important. Real Batman, thanks for that. The sleeping arrangements, not only of the McCanns, but the John Benet Ramsey household, very, very important, especially when you're talking about young children. You know, what is actually going on? What is the dynamics between them, between their parents, and so on. Anyway, so with Madeleine, it's this whole idea of she wasn't a very she didn't sleep easily, and when she did sleep, she didn't necessarily sleep through the night. Now, what do you do in a situation like that where you're on holiday and you want to enjoy yourself at night? You want to go out for dinner. So that's the one thing with John Benet Ramsey. The housekeeper was the one who said that, well, John Benet really had trouble sleeping. She would watch movies of Shirley Temple in her bed. You know, she had a TV in her room, but she struggled to sleep. She struggled with insomnia. But regardless of that, it actually later came out that it was very likely that John Benet didn't sleep soundly, and in fact went downstairs and probably ate some pineapple. And Burke Ramsey himself also said that he didn't go to sleep that night either. He actually went downstairs and he was playing later on, right? So you kind of have these narratives of the children, these initial narratives that, no, absolutely no problem. Our children slept completely. They were sound sleepers. Everything was great. And then only for later to emerge for those who were paying attention that actually they weren't sleeping so soundly, right? And then all the stuff that came out of that. There was another point I wanted to make in terms of John Benet's sleeping. The other thing was both cases also sort of have this mythos that both children were taken from their beds. And do you think that is true? Do you think John Benet was taken from her bed? If not, where did things happen? What was going on? Do you think Madeleine McCann was taken from her bed? If not, what really happened? And so before I'm about to get started, but before we do, if you think about this alternate narrative, no, she was sleeping soundly. There's even a story that John Benet was taken upstairs to bed and she was like already asleep. She was asleep in the car. And then that was even disputed. So you have like this narrative, and then it turns out that there's this counter narrative going on. And you might think that's singular, but the same thing is happening with Ukraine right now. There's a one narrative about Ukraine that a certain number of people believe and know, and there's another narrative of Ukraine that a certain number of people know and believe. So this idea that we know the truth and that we can tell the truth and that we can discern the truth, I don't know if it's really that true. When you know what, you might say something like the Russians in Russia don't really know what's going on. but we know what's going on. Well, if you look at the John Benet Ramsey case and the Madeleine McCann case, do we know what's going on? If our own media, and I don't think it's always done maliciously or purposefully. Sometimes I think it's just done out of ignorance. The media, I'm a media person, I worked in a newsroom. The media basically echo what they are told. In other words, they interview someone and they repeat what they are told. Often they don't interpret it, and that is something that I think is missing in journalism, and that's why I took the route that I went as a journalist, because I didn't really feel like I want to just echo what someone's saying when I don't necessarily agree with it. Mel Stiller says, knowing and believing are unrelated. 70 says, I wonder if you can join in our John Benet Ramsey discussion later this week since you watched. Yeah, Cotton Star, if you could join us, that would be awesome. I don't actually know, Cotton Star, were you actually at CrimeCon? I actually got a call from News Nation asking me for the footage that I had in my video. And I mentioned that I didn't say her name, but I mentioned that one of my patrons were there and she took some video. But I mean, you could have just gotten that footage off the CrimeCon Instagram. Cotton Star says she was very sound asleep, only virtually. Because I think Stephanie was really dying to meet you, but it seems like she had a very busy time anyway. So just for the people who are here right now, the folks in chat right now, how many of you think, just on these two questions, not relevant or irrelevant, how many of you think that Bruckner's alibi works or is acceptable? In other words, if you think he does have an alibi, say yes. If you think he doesn't, say no. Let's just do a quick poll. Does Bruckner have an alibi? Yes or no? What do you guys think? So I see yes is up to 31%, irrelevant 40%, no 28%. Yes is now up to 33%. 54 have voted so far. There are almost 100 of you in chat, so make sure you do vote. I see we're up to 57 votes. Yes has got 33%, so a third of the vote. In fact, all three of these answers are almost equal. 33% yes, 30% no, 37% irrelevant. So just a few more of you think that he does have an alibi, and that's a yes. Quite interesting. So let's look at what you guys are saying. Yes, 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 no. Pause and Finn says yes. Sunflower says I don't know. Margie says yes. Buffy says not sure. So it looks like, yeah, it looks like you kind of split. Looks like you kind of split. So we'll do another poll at the end, and hopefully we'll have covered some territory since then. We hopefully will have become more certain of the question, of the answer to the question. Okay. So we're at about 15 minutes. Shall we get started? There are 100 people in chat. Let's go. German authorities believe they've solved the McCann case. In fact, it seems like they believed it for the past 2 years. And they based this belief on the barroom confession of Christian Bruckner, who was 29 years old and living in a camper van in the Algarve when almost 4-year-old Madeleine McCann, a little girl from Britain, a British child, on holiday with her parents in Portugal when she disappeared. The German authorities also claim a ping from a mast near the Ocean Club Hotel where Madeleine was taken, as well as a 30-minute call, places him at the scene on the night of May 3rd, 2007. In addition, the Germans have another key witness, a woman who claims she called Bruckner from a number ending in 683 and spoke to him at this critical time. That seems pretty compelling, doesn't it? All of that. You've got some cell phone evidence. you've got a witness, you've got a confession. What more do you need than that? So there's also Bruckner's backstory. You're not really going to go into it here, but that's also quite interesting. If you don't know the case very well, and if you don't know the details, this may seem like very convincing evidence. But if it's so convincing, how come Bruckner's never been charged? How come this whole thing has been sort of floating in the mainstream media for 2 years and nothing seems to happen? In fact, recently, the German authorities have had to ask the Portuguese, can you please basically charge Bruckner, make him an arguido, make him an official suspect, so that the statute of limitations on this case doesn't run out, which it would have today, essentially, on the 15-year anniversary, because the statute of limitations on serious crimes is 15 years. So they've had to do that in order to keep the sort of show going. But nevertheless, Bruckner's never been charged, never been put on trial, and in fact claims he has an alibi for the night in question. For the purposes of this analysis, I'm going to assume that you are aware of Bruckner's storied and sordid backstory. Although he's a sexual deviant, for sure, that's not in dispute, he seems to be more into dealing drugs, burglarizing, and petty theft. In other words, that's the baseline of his criminal identity. He's more of a drug addict and a drug dealer and a drug fiend, if that's the word, than something else. I'm not saying he's not other things, but more than anything else, he's kind of like a druggie, right? And I think if you accept that, so you might be listening to this and saying, no, that is not who he is, he's actually this or whatever. But if you do accept that, then you may accept the point that the baseline of his criminal identity and drug dealers in general and drug addicts in general is that they're notorious liars, right? In other words, people who are sort of drug-addled and who are constantly on drugs, who are addicted like their whole lives, whose identity is sort of mixed up in drugs, are well known as being deceivers and notorious liars, dissemblers, malingerers, right? And nobody deceives like an addict. That is an adage from Sherlock Holmes's brother Mycroft. I've used that quite a lot in the Summer Wells case, right? And so I think there's a serious problem with the German authorities accepting the barroom confession, right? So basically this dude saying that he did something, they're saying, oh, we believe you. We think what you're saying is absolutely true. Could you do the same thing with Chris Watts? Could you say, oh, you've admitted to that and that, we believe it. You sometimes got to be careful accepting what a suspect is telling you. I'm not saying you dismiss all of it, but you certainly don't accept it as face value and you don't treat it as prima facie evidence. You don't say, well, this is basically the meat and potatoes of our case. So isn't there a similar issue with accepting his alibi? So, if you say, be careful accepting his confession, well, then shouldn't you also be careful accepting his alibi, right? And apparently he wrote a 4-page letter to investigator Mark Williams Thomas. It's dated the 11th April 2022, which shows you that Mark Williams Thomas has sort of been sitting on it for almost a month. To be honest, when I first started hearing noises about Bruckner writing letters, it sort of reminded me a bit of the letters coming from Chris Watts and where that ended up going. But also, for a while, I wasn't sure, did he write to someone else in America? Because I know she was on Australian TV. And then she gave the letter to Mark Williams Thomas. Exactly what happened, I wasn't really sure. When I look at the letter, I can't quite see who it's addressed to. And it's written in another language. I think it's written in German. So I can't quite see if he's addressed it to Dear Mark or whatever. I don't see that. But I also don't know whether he maybe wrote the same letter and sent it to a bunch of people. I don't really know. But regardless, he wrote a letter and he basically said something in that letter. Now, in the analysis that follows, I'm going to highlight Mark Williams Thomas's findings. He wrote a really long article in the Daily Mail. Let me put a link to that in the description. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the parts that I think are meaningful, and then after that, I'm going to give you Mark Williams's assessment, his sort of standing, his opinion on where this evidence gets us. Also, the points he used to reinforce the research, who he spoke to, where he went, kind of his whole credibility argument. And then once we've done that, I'm going to give you the TCRS assessment. I'm going to basically take you through, not very, very briefly, how I differ from Mark Williams Thomas. And then it's up to you to make up your own minds what you guys think. Makes sense. So we're really going to go through three areas. We're going to go through the article he wrote, go through where all of this gets us, according to Mark Williams Thomas, and then my opinion of that, right? So those three sort of areas. So we start off with key findings. So let me just, for those of you who don't know me, I've written 5 books on the Madeleine McCann case. I was busy writing a 6th book called Beach of Light, and that was to contrast with the previous book, which is called Deeper into Darkness. It was to turn darkness into light, right? And it was a bit of a play on this whole thing with Bruckner. Oh, Bruckner is the answer to this whole case. It was a bit of a play on that. I was actually expecting the Bruckner case to come and go. And in fact, it's still sort of, the circus is still going on, the show is still going on. So I kind of put the book on hold, and I was like, I'll write this book when that's over, and perhaps when the Court of Human Rights reaches its decision. That was my thinking then. Of course, I'm now at a point where I sort of consider myself retired from writing, so I'm not sure if I will write the book at all. We'll see. I've also traveled to Praia de Luz. I went there 3 years ago on the 12-year anniversary. So I was there exactly 12 years ago. In fact, I was actually at the in front of the Madeleine McCann apartment, almost like right now, almost like at this time, 3 years ago. So I was literally running around Praia de Luz on May 3rd, and I write about what I was doing, what I was where I was going, the timing, things that I did, and everything, as a way of testing out a theory, and that is in my book, Deeper into Darkness. I'm quite pleased to see it's already got more reviews than the book that preceded it, Deep into Darkness. I've also, as I say, photographed, measured, and researched this case, not only remotely, but in situ. I've also traveled all around the area. I've gone to Cape St. Vincent, and in fact, I liked Portugal so much, I've been considering moving there, retiring there, so we'll see. So anyway, that brings us to key findings. And the first thing that is really interesting in this article, in this research by Mark Williams Thomas, is that his alibi amounts to a holiday fling. In the week that Madeleine disappeared, 29-year-old Bruckner was having a holiday fling with a 17-year-old teenage girl. Every night she'd meet him for a secret dalliance, and they'd spend several hours together in his van. That's the first thing. The second, the setting for these secret intimacies was about 44 kilometers or 27 miles from Praia de Luz. That's basically east of Praia de Luz, a resort known as Carvoeiro. Assuming he was staying in prior delusion, that's definitely an assumption. It would have taken Bruckner about 40 minutes to get there in his van, and that's a round trip of over an hour. Now, there are different opinions on where Bruckner was really based. It seems like he did live for a while in prior delusion, but he also kind of camped in his van for periods of time in different locations. And there are photos of that, right? So each evening, Bruckner would leave his camping spot on the coastal fringe of Barranco Beach, drive to Carvoeiro, park, and leave the next morning at 10 a.m. In the days after Madeleine disappeared, Bruckner was still supposedly driving around in the van in which Madeleine was apparently abducted. So that already makes things a little bit difficult. On May 10th, a week after Madeleine disappeared, the holiday romance ended when the German teen, who's now 32 years old, flew home with her parents. Also, Bruckner used a cell phone ending in 680. For me, something that's a bit bizarre is that the full number is apparently not known. So he was using a cell phone ending in the number 680 in early 2007. Now I'm going to quote from the Daily Mail, from Mark Williams Thomas's article, quote, "Phone records show categorically that between 7:32 p.m. and 8:02 p.m., this number was in use to another Portuguese phone ending in the number 683. It has been widely reported that analysis of the signal places the 680 number, quote, very close to the Ocean Club, perhaps even outside the McCann's window," end quote. I find that a little bit over the top, saying something like that. It's like, wow, this phone could have been right outside the McCann's window. Really, wow, that's incredible. But it's a bit, I think it's a bit excessive to say that. Then another point, the cell phone mast at the number 680 pinged off was about 200 yards from the Ocean Club, but the mast has a range of, get this, 21 miles. So to say that, well, you know what, maybe someone was on the phone right outside the McCann's window. Well, they could have been right outside the window. They could have been sitting with them at the table of the tapas restaurant, or they could have been on the beach, or they could have been on the Roja Negra, or they could have been anywhere else for 21 miles in any direction. So another point that Mark Williams Thomas makes, I'm not going to go through his argument, but he says 680 could actually belong to anyone. It's only three numbers. He's saying, you know, to say that this number definitely belonged to Bruckner, yeah, it could have, but it could also belong to someone else. So I don't know whether logically, commonsensically, or legally you could make a case that this is evidence that the 680 number made a call between that number and that time and that time. You might make quite a convincing argument if his girlfriend says, yes, I called him between 7:30 and 8. Does it mean that he was at the Ocean Club at that time? I've got a completely different argument against that, to say, it could have belonged to me, even if it was him, even if you could take a photo of him and there he is at the Ocean Club and he's on his phone. So if he was there at 8:02 p.m., so what? If he's there at 8:02 p.m., the crime's only supposed to have taken place an hour later. And in my argument is very likely 2 hours later. So that's not an alibi. An alibi is where were you at the time, not where were you close to the time. Where were you at the time? And then it goes on to say, to add to the this is quoting from the article, to add to the circumstantial evidence, the 683 number, so the number that he was talking to at the time, Mark Williams Thomas is linked to basically somebody else. So according to Mark Williams Thomas, the 680 number is supposed to have been somebody else, and the 683 number is also supposed to have been somebody else, not his girlfriend. he describes also this, to me, a bit excessive intrigue that the 603 number could be someone on the dark web, etc. I'm not really going to go into that, but that's what he says. So what I do think is quite interesting is to further reinforce his findings. Williams-Thomas adds that he checked flight records to confirm that the unidentified German family, including the 17-year-old, were in the Algarve that week. What I don't like about this article is there aren't really that many specifics. We don't know the name of the 17-year-old teenager. We don't know her surname. We don't know her family. And so I suppose they exist, but it's not really nice in this situation that she doesn't come forward. It's a witness, but is it really a witness if you're not getting their story firsthand? I also don't like that we don't know when they arrived. We know when they left. We know they left on the 10th, which is about a week after the disappearance. I don't like that we don't have clarity on the day they arrived. So maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see anything about them arriving and this, when did this affair initiate? Did it initiate before Madeleine disappeared, the day Madeleine disappeared, or after? To me, that is quite material. So in that sense, I don't really know whether this is an alibi, right? Williams-Thomas says he's tracked this woman down to a small town in Germany. She's 32 years old now, and she's understandably reluctant to speak out in public. So she's a witness and also not. Williams-Thomas says if she's called to testify, she might have to. Well, I'm not sure we'll know one way or another directly from her. And I'm the first person to say, I'd love to see a trial. I'd love to see something in terms of Madeleine McCann go to court, and then let's see all the characters testify, and let's get some legal certainty on what has happened, because that's what this case needs. It needs a trial, right? And I think some people want a trial and some people don't want a trial. The longer Madeleine is alive, the longer there can't be a trial, because apparently she's safe and sound somewhere out there, right? So now I'm going to give you Mark Williams-Thomas's expert assessment. So he will tell you that nobody knows the case better than he does, that he's been on the scene since like day 3 since this happened. And so kind of like he's the best guy to go for in terms of knowledge of this case, right? So he says he flew to Praia de Luz within 3 days of her disappearance, so presumably somewhere around May 6th. He was one of the many journalists on scene. Then he writes the following. He says, quote, in my determination to get to the truth, I've interviewed more people, tracked down more witnesses, and broken down more obstacles than any other investigator. So I guess that's code for saying, guys, I'm the best source. I'm the best research on the Madeleine McCann case, bar none. If you need to know something, come to me. I'm number one. I'm the number one dude on this case, right? Then he goes on to say, I've spoken in depth to the German prosecutors and Bruckner's solicitor, as well as corresponding with the suspect himself. Then he says, what I've just uncovered is deeply troubling. Then he says, the much vaunted confession in a bar simply doesn't stand up. Now, I can kind of sit here and say, I didn't need to go to Germany. I didn't need to speak to Bruckner. I didn't need to write to him to come to that conclusion. Thank you for doing that. I'm not saying it's not worth anything, but it's not, to me, not surprising. But anyway, so far so good. Then he's got a sidebar in his Daily Mail piece, and he provides his theory of the case. That to me is like, that's quite important. It's basically, so you know this case like nobody else. You've been like boots on the ground. You've spoken to people. You obviously thought about it. There's also a. Did I put a link to the article in the live in the chat? I did, right. There's actually a picture of Mark Williams-Thomas on scene, like in front of the apartment at night. And I recognize that lighting so well because Copy image address. Let's see if I can share it with you, because I took photos in the same place. I hope you can see that. Can you guys see that picture? Should be able to. I took photos kind of in the same place, on the same road, the same time of night, and it also has that sort of yellow appearance, that sort of, everything is kind of yellow due to the street lighting. So I kind of recognize that. And it does mean something to go there. It does mean something to go there, and that's a really steep road that is going up there, and it's sort of got a kink in it, and almost all the roads do. All the roads sort of go straight for a short distance, and it either goes downhill or it goes left or right or whatever. There's very few roads that have got long line of sight, which is quite interesting. So Mark Williams Thomas, now he's been boots on the ground, he's thought about it. What is his sort of summary of the case? Like what is his point? What is his position? And he starts off with the following thing. I'm not going to read the whole thing. He says, quote, "The mistake most investigators have made was to assume she, meaning Madeleine, was taken from her bed in the apartment." That's 100% right. I think a lot of people make the same mistake in the John Benet Ramsey case, that someone went into a bedroom with a stun gun. It's just absolutely crazy. So you're forgetting about the pineapple in her stomach. Anyway, you've also got to think with the John Benet Ramsey case, you kind of get the idea that the news that's around her, that she consented to that. I know there's some people who think that all of that is staging, but I believe that was part of like gameplay, part of role playing or whatever. And she had to consent to that. And would she have consented to that if it was a complete stranger doing that? Anyway, so the other thing that he says shortly after that is he says, in fact, it is far more likely that Maddie left on her own. So he's kind of saying Maddie wasn't taken from her bed. Maddie got up out of bed, I guess, and walked out the apartment and so on. And that's kind of where I'm like, huh? Did I read that right? So this investigator who really vaunts himself as really knowing this case, that's his theory, that Maddie left on her own. And then he provides some more material to support that. He says, quote, "That morning, she'd said that her brother and sister, Sean and Emily, had woken up the previous evening while everyone was out at dinner, and their crying worried her. In fact, what she said to her parents were, where were you when I was crying, right? And that's not like iffy evidence. There was also an upstairs neighbor who heard her crying for a long time. So she was crying, and very close to the time that all of this happened. So in terms of that, I agree that it's likely that she didn't sleep very soundly and all that kind of thing. But to me, it's like, whoa, did I miss something here? Or did you miss something here? I mean, it's true that everything is said, but where's this going? So he goes on to say something about what would be more natural for Madeleine to have just woken up again and gone outside looking for her parents. And then he writes the following: "Perhaps she turned the wrong way as she left the flat and wandered into the car park. Wherever she was, a predatory stranger saw her, and that's his theory." My, as Joe Kender would say, my. Pardon me for being blunt, but I don't see that as much of a theory when you like. It's like, what about all of this evidence that you're ignoring? Like, do you just say talk to the dogs or something like that? I mean, do you just there's a whole like bunch of files, you just push that aside and go, no, that's irrelevant. Oh, okay. How is that irrelevant? So I just find that it's a theory that's been put out there, but to me it's a bit poorly conceived. It's like, wow, have you really thought about this enough? It also doesn't really. It sort of takes you into nowhere. So it says she wandered off, and then somebody took her that nobody saw, and the end. We don't know what happened. It's not really giving you anything, is it? So now I'm going to give you my assessment, right? And I'm going to come to it from a kind of a different angle. In the 2017 sci-fi horror flick Alien Covenant, it's directed and produced by Ridley Scott. A humanoid robot called Walter asks an outdated model who looks just like him. It's basically Michael Fassbender asking himself. So it's two robots talking to each other, acted by Michael Fassbender. Anyway, the one is called Walter, and Walter asks the other one, who wrote Ozymandias? And the other guy answers Byron. And Walter shakes his head and he says Shelley. And then he says, when one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David. In the Madeleine McCann case, Bruckner isn't the off note. So it's not a case that the off note is Bruckner and that's why nothing is kind of making sense. Bruckner's not the off note. Bruckner is just a sign of how seriously the whole symphony of reality has been deconstructed, misconstrued, and ultimately destroyed. I don't know if it's just me. I don't know whether certain editors, certain police in Britain, I don't know if they truly are in the dark and truly just are confused and truly don't know what the reality is. But it feels like the symphony of reality is being deconstructed. That's what it feels like. I don't know whether they're pretending that they don't know what happened or whether they really don't know what happened. It's hard to say. But the fact that Bruckner is kind of being discussed in the British media for 2 years, and also that the Germans are sort of going after him the way they are, it's a sign, as I say, of how seriously the whole symphony of reality has been sort of destroyed. And you have a symphony of reality with the Ukraine war as well. So there's also an attempt to make an off note with that as well. We say, no, this is a special military operation. And you make other sort of comments about whatever, I'm not going to say the words, but in Ukraine, and then all sorts of things happen, right? And so the symphony of reality is destroyed by just changing a note here and there. And some people do that purposefully, and sometimes it happens perhaps because we misunderstand certain things. We do get a clue to the off note. So you might say, so if Bruckner's not the off note in the Madeleine McCann case, what is the off note, right? We get a clue to the off note in this casual observation from the article, quote, and this is what Mark Williams Thomas writes. He says, quote, is it conceivable that this man drove to Praia de Luz, kidnapped a 3-year-old sometime after 9 p.m.? And I've kind of highlighted those words, sometime after 9 p.m., right? And when he's talking about this man, he's talking about Bruckner, right? Sometime after 9 p.m. So for many years, the official investigation placed the time of the incident, which is a critical pillar when building your case, closer to 9 p.m. And it seems like Mark Williams Thomas does as well. Is basically going, sometime after 9 p.m., maybe something happened. Now, to me, the time that something happens is one of the most critical, if not the most critical, aspects to the mystery when something happens in true crime. In other words, the time that something happened is absolute. Like it happened in reality, and we don't know when it happened, and maybe we can't tell when it happened, but it nevertheless happened. And it happened, no matter what we know or what the evidence we find, it happened in a particular way, in a particular order, in a way that is a mystery to us. But it's nevertheless, in reality, it happened at a specific time to the minute and to the second. And so the challenge is, can you figure that out? Or can't you? Can you figure it out better than sometime after 9 p.m.? And I think you need to. I think you need to do that, because part of the important thing is you've got to say, well, at that particular time, where were the people in the story? Because you've got the musical chairs thing going on with the top of 7. At this time, so many are sitting at the table. At that time, that one's getting up. At this time, that one's come back. So you need to have a time, at least in your mind, where you go, this is, I think, when the moment that something happened to Madeleine, where was everyone? Were they accounted for, right? And have people really thought about that? Have people actually thought about it in a specific way, deliberate way, right? If let me put the question over to you guys. At what time do you think Madeleine was taken? Let's get your input here. So I'll give you 4 options. Close to 9 o'clock, or close to 10 o'clock, or you can give a more specific time than that. I think another option is, let's say 9:30. So 9 o'clock, close to 9 o'clock, 9:30, close to 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock. What's your answer? Angela Gallagher says 10-ish. Thought Criminal says 9. Debbie McLennan says 10. Eileen says 10. Nisi says 9:30. Karina says she was not taken. Dan says don't think was taken. Stephanie says after 10. Zista says 9:30. Someone else says no clue. Peter Howell says 21:45. That's a good guess. Okay, so now what we've just spoken about is the time that Madeleine may have been taken. But that also brings up another possibility. What if Madeleine died before she was taken? Right? It's just a what if. What if Madeleine died before she was taken? What time did she die then? So it's a kind of a double hypothetical. First of all, if she died, what time did she die? And then answer that question. And then also, okay, so there's that. And then also, at what time was she taken, right? I don't believe that maybe the days before theory. Just don't believe that. So, as I say, for many years, the official investigation placed the time of the incident a critical pillar when building your case closer to 9 p.m. And that happened for something like 4 years and change, almost 5 years. For basically a third of the investigation, it's been 15 years. So for almost 5 years, the cops, you'd think with doctors and so on, this would be one of the most intelligently researched and investigated cases. Well, for 4 or 5 years, they had the timeline at close to 9 p.m. and they were looking for Tanner Man. And then they realized, oh, we've been investigating the wrong person all this time. And when they realized that, they realized, oh, so the timeline's also wrong. We need to move the timeline closer to 10 p.m., right? And so they had to break loose from this kind of millstone holding down the investigation, sort of drowning the investigation. I mean, that's quite a good example of that's quite a good example in itself of one note that's wrong, in this case, the tenor man siding, that destroys the whole symphony of reality, right? So anyway, they managed to take out the wrong note, and now reality shifted to later in the evening, and it shifted to a different set of circumstances, right? And but it still seems like some people are either still clinging to the early in the night scenario, or they're still finding it relevant or realistic, right? And Mark Williams Thomas, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, he seems to be one of those people who's kind of going, I think it was close to 9 o'clock that this happened, or sometime after 9. Whereas I would say it's definitely not between, it's not before 9:30. It's not before 9:30. And so I think a major problem with many of the armchair investigations is that most people can't be specific about when and what time Madeleine disappeared. And that was one of the questions I challenged myself with when I studied this case and when I researched it. The question I was kind of asking is, you need to find out the time as closely, as specifically and exactly as possible that everything would make sense. And so there were a couple of ways of doing this. Part of why I went to Praia da Luz, part of why I went to apartment 5A on May 3rd was to check the time it would take to get from A to B and then back to A in order for certain calculations to make sense, to work out, right? And so you needed certain boxes to be ticked. You needed that witness to see something. You needed to be back at your seat at a certain time, and so on and so on. And so I was just testing a theory, right? But the whole thing was I was challenging myself to be as specific as I could about the time. And so my book, Deep into Darkness, was about that. It was about time, the mystery of time in the Madeleine McCann case. In the John Benet Ramsey case, it's also critical that you answer the question, what time did she likely die, right? And it's another question that people don't really ask very much. I've actually I just saw a clip where John Ramsey was saying the best cops in the business call this it's a DNA case. It's not a DNA case. Any case where the crime scene is absolutely compromised, where a lot of people are running through the crime scene, and then it's not a DNA case. So yeah, I differ from his opinion on that. So in terms of time is a vital calculus, because the time she disappeared also potentially has to fit in, I'm saying potentially, has to fit in with the 2 hours plus time frame it typically takes for cadaverine to form, something that's also an unacknowledged aspect in the fabric of this case. You never hear British journalists talking about that. You'll never hear them talking about cadaver dogs, cadaverine. There's a whole lot of information in the discovery, in the PJ files, talking about blood spatter and blood, supposedly blood. I suppose you could argue that it's something that Luminol tested and showed was some kind of fluid, but they found these traces behind the blue couch, and they found it under the tiles, and they found it in the tile grout. And you'll never see that really discussed anywhere. You won't see any talk about the cadaver dog alerts either. So anyway, cutting through all of that, in my view, somewhere at around 21:47, right, just after 9:45, that's when I think Madeleine was taken from the apartment. So not 9 o'clock, not sometime after 9, not 9:30, but close to 10 o'clock. Madeleine was taken from the apartment. And that's 21:47. That's my best guess, give or take a few minutes. Now, instead of hypothesizing vaguely about where she went or where she may have been taken, I think the route out of the apartment is also important. In other words, be specific about where she went. Which way did she go? Who was at certain points that we know that night, and what did they see? And so you need to time and measure your whole scenario. And that's exactly why the Portuguese authorities wanted to do a reenactment. They wanted the players to return to Praia da Luz so they could have the whole thing play out, And then the McCanns didn't want to do that. And then they later did, I think a year later, they did do a reenactment. Some of them returned to do a show for a television station. Like some of them came back and did do a reenactment. So that is what I investigated when I wrote Deeper into Darkness. That was based on an in-situ investigation, and I'm going to put a link to that in chat. This is a link to the UK book. So I don't think she was wandered off. I don't think she was taken from her bed. But I'm not going to really take it further than that. I will say that my feeling is that unless you can tell me that the family arrived in Praia da Luz prior to May 3rd and that Bruckner's affair with this teenager was already underway by then and they were already doing their nightly thing, unless you can provide that information in a clear and concise way. In other words, they were on a nightly basis meeting, and maybe if they were on holiday for 2 weeks, that would be possible. But I doubt whether he would have started a relationship with her like the day that she arrived or something like that. And what is the day that she arrived? So I don't know whether you can say that he has an alibi. On the other hand, I don't know if you can say a cell phone ping, whether it's his phone or not his phone. I don't think 3 numbers are going to cut it. But like if it did go to trial, I don't think you could prove that 3 numbers are somebody's phone number. But regardless of that, even if it was his number, if he did get a call at 8 o'clock, but Madeleine was actually taken at 9:45, then it doesn't really make any sense. So he got a call almost 2 hours earlier. Where was he 2 hours later? That's the question. If he got a call at 9:30, I would say that's quite compelling. But 8 o'clock means absolutely nothing. Really means absolutely nothing. Whether he's right there at 8 o'clock, like standing at the apartment at 8 o'clock, also doesn't mean anything. It is who is standing at the apartment at 20 to 10. The calls that went out at 20 to 10. And one thing I will say is the McCann's call records on May 3rd are quite interesting to look at. The GPS data for the movements is also quite interesting to look at. There's not a lot of cell phone data in this case, but certainly what there is interesting. The same applies to the John Monet Ramsey case. There's actually not like phone records and credit card records. It's like you'd think, where are the phone records and credit card records? It's like, why aren't they? What's going on? Surely that's so simple. Where are the phone records and credit card records? And so in both cases, phone records and credit card records are kind of a little bit incomplete, especially credit cards. Like, we just want to know what you guys bought. What did you buy? And I really thought about this when I was in Praia da Luz and I was shopping at the same store. There's a Baptista supermarket kind of further down the road, Gentile Martins, you go a bit further down. It's directly below the Ocean Club. It's one of the best supermarkets in Praia da Luz. That's where I went shopping, even though I lived about 2 kilometers away. I stayed somewhere about 2 kilometers away. And by the end of my week in Praia da Luz, there were like lots of receipts from Baptista lying in my apartment. Well, where were the receipts from the Ocean Club of the Baptista supermarket. What are some of the things I bought when I was in Praia da Luz? Well, I can tell you I bought alcohol. I bought some takeaway dinners. I bought newspapers, etc., etc. What did they buy? We don't know. Why don't we know? Same with the John Benet Ramsey case. What did you guys buy for Christmas? What did this kid get? What did that kid get? Can we know, like for certain, this is exactly what we bought, that's what they got? Why is that also kind of a bit of a mystery? Simple, specific questions, but they're never really asked. So I think that is it. We're at the hour mark, so I don't think I'm going to take it too much further than that. Let's have a look at the poll here. Does Bruckner have an alibi? 26% say yes, it's not gone down quite a lot. No's 36% and 38% say irrelevant. I tend to agree that it's irrelevant, and also I'd say I don't know if he really does have an alibi. You would need to show me, you need to produce this witness, this lady, and if she says we were already having this affair, let's say on the 1st of May, and we saw each other every night. I can't remember what happened on May 3rd, but from the May 1st onwards, we saw each other every night. Then I'll say, okay, probably does have an alibi, but it's still probably. The other thing that I think is interesting is why is whether he had an alibi coming up 15 years later? Are you telling me that the Portuguese police didn't want to talk to him, and didn't they clear him at the time? Didn't the Portuguese police clear Bruckner at the time? So coming to anything 15 years later, it's sort of questionable value. So I see we've got 130 votes. There are 168 of you guys, 170 in chat. So if you haven't voted, please do. I see it's 40% now saying it's irrelevant. You must remember, if there is no, it's an if question. If there is no abductor, then whatever Bruckner was doing and wherever he was is irrelevant, right? In other words, the whole Bruckner thing is irrelevant because there's a false note in the symphony of reality, and that false note is because of time and other things. Okay, let's have a look at some of your comments. Mal Stiller says details, details, details. Karina says, well, Karina's been a member for 4 months. I'm so happy to be on my way back. I missed everyone and the mental challenges. Stephanie says, I get your thinking now. Okay. So, Stephanie, do you think you're going to be good to go on Thursday for a debrief on CrimeCon? Do you think you're going to be available? Briale says, I'm sticking to my original vote, no alibi or weak at best. That's why they're looking at Bruckner, no real alibi. Nisi says, glad you're doing well, Karina. Thank you, Nick. So enjoyed TCRS. By the way, yesterday was the 6-week anniversary of my broken rib. So I'm supposed to be in the clear now. I did actually think of going swimming this evening, but just pretty cold. It's been pretty cold of late. Stephanie says, does Friday work for you? Friday's not going to work. I'm going to a birthday party. Sorry. Does Thursday not work for you? Peter Howell says, smoke screen, divert conveniently for the 15th anniversary. Stephanie says, happy 6-week healing. Thanks a lot. After this, I'm probably going to, it's quite late here, it's 11 o'clock at night. I swim at a gym, but I'm probably going to do a little bit of running on the treadmill slowly, and then get on my exercise bike and do a little bit of cycling, and then have a hot shower. Margie says, great live, glad you've healed. Thanks for that. So what is quite interesting is the investigation into the whole thing has been basically scrapped, but the McCanns are still sort of, I think they're still getting money, still getting donations. So ostensibly the money is for the search, but now there's no sort of public search going on. So I think they spoke about something about this money might be, I saw some article saying if they lose their case against Portugal at the European Court for Human Rights, then I guess some of that money will go to that. The money for the search would go to losing a legal appeal at the European Court of Human Rights. And so the McCanns wouldn't really pay anything out of their own pockets based on whatever the result is. That result, as far as I was aware, was supposed to come out last year, and it never did. So now either it has come out and we don't know what the result is, or it still hasn't come out. Maybe COVID delayed the result, or maybe something else happened. I don't know. May says, do you think the parents should have been something for neglect? I think the way to answer that is there are certain prescriptions, I think, in the UK about leaving children unattended, and I think they differ from those in Portugal. I'm not going to take it further than that, but there are certain guidelines for what you can do with children in certain situations where the law prescribes that, and they differ to some extent in Portugal. I think something that is certainly interesting is it doesn't really matter what's in the media or what people's opinions are, but it is interesting. I know someone, she's not actually here in chat, although if she is, I haven't seen her, but someone that is a mod, I'm not going to say her name, actually lives in Boulder, I believe, lives in Boulder, Colorado. And if you ask her, what do the people there think happened? It's pretty unambiguous. It's a pretty clear position, right? And if you go to Prior Delusion, you ask people, the locals, you ask them, what do you think happened? It's pretty unambiguous. It's pretty clear what they think. It's not like a big mystery to them. Stephanie says, how about Saturday, 4 p.m.? Yeah, that could work. Let's keep it there for the time being. So what Mel Stiller says, how the McCanns got away with their refusal to be interviewed, that's quite interesting. That's another parallel with the Ramsey case. With the McCann case, this incident happened today, 15 years ago, May 3rd. They only spoke to the police in a sort of formal capacity where they were questioned with some difficult questions. Kate McCann was asked 48 questions, which she refused to answer. 4 months later, So May, June, July, August, 4 months later. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, it was similar. It was at the end of April. So that incident happened on the night of Christmas Day, right? And so they were only spoken to January, February, March, end of April, also 4 months later, exactly the same length of time. And although they answered questions, they set conditions for talking to the police. It wasn't like, oh, we'll talk to you. So, yeah, quite a few similarities. Patricia Chung says, first time hearing about your broken rib, what happened? Happy to hear that you are doing much better. I have not received notification for your channel lately. Well, then you should unsubscribe and then subscribe again and then hit the notification if you haven't been getting notifications. That does sometimes happen. Patricia, I'm going to see if I can locate for you a video that explains what happened to my rib. But in just being brief, I basically fell off my mountain bike going about 32 kilometers an hour. Let's see if I can get the video where I show the x-ray, then I can just share that with you. Wow, got to go far back in time. Oh, here it is. At Patricia. There you go. Yeah, 6 weeks happened overnight. Sharon Lynn says Madeleine would have been 19 on May 13. You've also got to kind of wonder if you accept that Madeleine is out there, would she not know it? And also, would Facebook not facially recognize her? You know, things like that. She's also got that very distinctive mark on her eye. Today, I was also looking at photos of the search forms that they use. In other words, the search pamphlets. And you've got to wonder, why on earth would you put a picture of Madeleine on there when it didn't really look like Madeleine? It's that really famous picture of her, you know, with the mark on her eye. The same as the cover of Kate McCann's book. Why would you put a picture of Madeleine where she was, I think, 2 years old rather than when she was closer to 4? And why not use a holiday photo? Because that's literally what she looked like. You know, if you're looking for someone, why don't you put a picture out of her that looks like her? In the JonBenet Ramsey case, you kind of had a similar thing as well, that, but for different reasons, that the JonBenet we saw wasn't like the real JonBenet. Like JonBenet wasn't, she didn't look like the beauty queen JonBenet in reality when she went to school. But that was due to a different set of circumstances. That was the media sort of kind of taking over that narrative in a way. Patricia, thanks. Glad you've got that. Okay, so we're approaching an hour 15. I think I'm going to cut it off here. Alison Rogers says lawyers would advise okay. My May says she's never going to be found. I tend to agree with you on that. But I think one's got to ask why. Why, like, you know, in the same way that time is part of the reality here, where is Madeleine actually, even if she's in a form of like being dissolved, where could one locate her in that molecular sense? So just to reiterate, when one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony. And so that's why it's so important to make sure you pay attention to details, especially like the timeline. The timeline is probably one of the most important pillars in true crime. There are others that are also really important, like identity, the identity of the person you're talking about, and then also things like dynamics. What are the dynamics between this person and that person? And so think about those questions. Timeline, so it's not just a point in time, but a line of time. The identity of a person, and then the dynamics of a person. Think about that in the context of the Vicky White case as a way of figuring out what's going on without all the evidence. Who is a person? When did this happen? What are the feelings and relationships going on, connecting one person to another and to other things, other realities? Okay, guys, thanks for joining me. Thanks for the super chats. Members, thanks for being here. Obviously, tomorrow's Wednesday, so I'll be doing another bunch of letters in our thing on Vincent van Gogh, so don't miss that. It'll be around about this time tomorrow. I might get to 87,800 subscribers before then, but then it'll fall back to 87.7. That's just what's been going on for quite a while, so, but that's okay. Sorry, not 87.7, 86.7. But like I said, I'm riding the slump. Okay, guys, take care. I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.